Pope on the Move and Chaucer's New Groove. I am, as always, your host, Christopher Paul Dugdale, MEDMA. We are Duncanville High School in these United States, and today is September 16th, 2020. And in este dia de historia, Padre Miguel Hidalgo y Costilla da un gran grito de independencia. Okay, this is basically Mexican Independence Day. Okay, uh, so anyway, celebrate everyone. Have a great day.
So this is our last look at the geography of Europe, really in a study on its own. So on the map on the right, you look at Europe's natural regions. Now remember, it's farther north than the United States. Most of Europe on the North American continent would be north of would be Canada and further north. So they have a lot more colder weather than we do here in the United States. Okay. So you see all the plains that are in England and France and Northern Europe. They're mainly plains. You see the Arctic glacier regions of Norway, Sweden, and Finland. Uh, there's a lot of mountains throughout. Uh, the Pyrenees, the Alps uh, are the most infamous of the mountain ranges. I'm not going to spend much more time on this map but this just gives you a better look at the topography of Europe. Now, this is what they use the land for. Arable land would be land that you can farm on. That is the light green. The dark green, these are woodlands. So, despite the fact how cold it is in Norway and Sweden and Finland, there's also a lot of trees. Uh, it's a little bit more bare as you go through most of Central Europe. Okay, I'm moving on because this is only so interesting. Resources. As you move throughout Europe, you can see where they produce chemicals. Petroleum is much more in Eastern Europe and down towards the Middle East. Let's see, what else do we have? You see the manufacturing cities. Those are some of the bigger cities of Europe. Major ports. I don't know. I'm not going to force you to look on this. Uh, yeah, I'm going to keep moving. Eastern Europe. This is something we don't talk a lot about, but you can see the elevation of the land. A lot of the Czech Republic and Slovakia now are very mountainous, as are the northern parts of the peninsula just north of Greece. Actually, Greece is pretty mountainous as well, but almost all that land is mountainous. Siberia and the northern parts of Russia is very cold. Uh, it only gets to about 60 degrees during the summer, and during the winter it will get down to about negative 30 degrees. And it'll stay pretty close between, freezing point, negative 30 degrees for most of the winter. Uh, Other major regions of Russia, and Russia is technically European, although the majority of the country is in Asia. But they've always been treated much more as a European nation, as an Asian nation. Okay, uh, there's some good farmland in the northern and southern areas, but a lot of this area gets pretty cold. The winters are really bad in most parts of Russia where people live, and it's even worse where people don't live. So let's talk about the church for a little bit. The church filled the vacuum of the Roman Empire. Okay, French King Philip IV got into a fight with Pope Boniface the Eighth, and they wanted to start taxing the church. And the Pope said you can't do that without the support of the Pope. So King Philip IV of France jailed Boniface VIII. Boniface would escape, but then he died. So Philip IV made a new pope in Avignon, France, and that was Clement V. So he decided to just move the papacy from Rome to France. So for about 70 years, the pope was based out of France. Uh, Petrarch, who we'll talk about later on, the father of humanism, he basically said this time period was kind of like the Bible when the Israelites were forced into captivity and slavery in Babylon. So uh, Gregory the 11th would return the papacy to Rome and then die. But that doesn't mean that there weren't popes. So you have what's called the Great Schism. So Rome elected the Italian Pope Urban the Sixth, and Clement the Seventh was appointed the Pope in France. So at this point, you had two different popes, two different leaders of all the Catholic faith, and this was a major split throughout all of the Catholic churches of Europe. Each one of the popes claimed that the other was Antichrist, and it almost restarted the Hundred Years' War. So eventually, what the Catholic Church did is they decided to elect one brand new pope, and he would be based in Rome, just like the popes before the move to Avignon. So they elect Martin V, and this gets rid of most of the problems with the split in the Catholic Church. But for the better part of about 100 years, there was a fight over where the Pope was and who should be in charge of the Church. So after this great schism or split, a lot of people left the Church. The bubonic plague kind of brings people back into it. So anyone who's looking for a silver lining to the bubonic plague who is Christian would say, oh, okay, it brought more people back to the church. Okay, so people started buying more of their forgiveness of sins, and so this started to raise a lot of money for the church afterwards, because a lot of people believed that the plague was a punishment from God and that you needed to turn back in order to not die. Okay, conciliarism is a belief that the Holy Roman Emperor, uh, that they could create a council in the church, and that only the Holy Roman Emperor could limit the power of the church. And the Holy Roman Emperor was not this great emperor. He was just the leader of most of the German kingdoms, and he was elected by German kings. So this is not a powerful position, really, because most of the German kingdoms could ignore him if they wanted to. Mysticism. This is a belief in a personal experience with God. Uh, Johann Meister Eckhart talked about intimate connection with the Bible and God in one's soul. This belief in mysticism. Okay, these are changes that took place after the Great Schism. So the thought that relationships would be different, and the fact that maybe the Pope didn't play as important a role for some people as he did before. Gerard Groot, he started the modern devotion, and this inspires a model to try and imitate Jesus Christ. So this is much more of a poverty-based lifestyle where you would try and go around and do good works. Catherine of Siena, who we briefly mentioned before, she gave up all solid food and lived off of herbs and the Eucharist or communion ceremony. She believed that she could sustain herself with just communion. Oddly enough, she was very thin and did not live for a long period of time. but she tried to perform a model for everyone else in Europe and how to be a good Christian. So you've heard the term vernacular before, okay? Vernacular literature was not written in Latin and was written for the common people. Most of the scholarly books of the time were written in Latin, and so it really separated you from the poor, because the poor would never really get the stories or any of the advanced education, or really any education at all. Literacy was a very uncommon thing for anyone in Europe at the time. We're talking about probably 1 or 2 out of every 1,000 people could were even partially literate. Okay, Dante Alighieri, this Italian, he is exiled from Florence, and he writes a book called The Divine Comedy, and this talks about the 7 deadly sins, and this is really his journey through hell and purgatory to get to heaven. For those of you who don't know the 7 deadly sins, they're things like sloth and envy and lust, and there's other ones too. There's 7. I should know them, but I don't. I guess they're ones that I practice all the time. Murder's probably in there too, so I don't murder people. So if you've heard any rumors about me murdering people, no, I will step on an ant without any remorse. So. Christine de Pizan, she wrote a book called The Book of the City of Ladies. And this was this was pushing for women's rights, to education, to a lack of male supervision. And she shows examples from the past of women who had done important things, and how women should be educated and have more rights than they'd had at that time period. Uh, Francesco Petrarch, I talked about him earlier as the father of humanism. He found a lot of forgotten Latin manuscripts, and he was the one who really saw the Middle Ages as a time separate from the Roman ages, and tried to distinguish factors that made it different from the time that came before it. He started to focus on the basics, the literary works of ancient Greece and Rome. Uh, he thought for you to be really intellectual, you needed to be studying all the time. So it was a much more solitary, lonely life. He got rid of, he told people to get rid of family and community and to serve people in the state in itself. So he studied things like basically the humanities. That's poetry, philosophy, history. Uh, I have a degree in the humanities. Okay, or actually, I have 2 degrees in the humanities. They're both history degrees, but that actually encompasses a lot more now. Uh, so Giovanni Boccaccio, okay, he wrote Decameron. This is 100 stories set during the bubonic plague, and it gave an insight to what the people were like during the bubonic plague, some of the psychological effects of it, and it tells the story of 10 people that tried to escape to the countryside to survive the plague. If you want to know more, you should read Decameron. It's a very, very depressing story, and there's a lot of people with psychological problems. Now, it's not one of your page turners like today, but it is a book. Now we'll get to one of my wife's favorite books of the time, and that is by Geoffrey Chaucer. Okay, he wrote this in English, and he's best known for Canterbury Tales, and it's about a trip from London to Canterbury. He's recognized really as England's best poet of the Middle Ages. And now, without any warning for my wife, I will have her recite from memory part of Canterbury Tales.
Andra opera with the shoulder sota, the droop of March had pisted to the river, and bathed every vein as which the form Andra was the floor.
So, my wife had to memorize that in high school, which was a few years ago. I won't say how long ago. looking at her, I would say about 5 years ago, but I've been married to her for 10, and that's not how I roll legally. So I know that she's probably older than that. But she still remembers that as if it were yesterday. So, as you can tell by what she recited, it's not really the type of English that you're familiar with today. So some of it is a little bit more complicated to read. But there's some value in it. Not everything that people will pay you to do or pay you to read now as part of your job will be easy to read, and that's why they would pay you more money if you can understand things that are not written in the same fashion that you speak. You want to be able to understand things that are a little bit more complex, and so when you read older text, it helps develop that skill because, in all reality, the technical manuals that you might have to read for some of your jobs will be so boring that you'll think back to that time that you had a car accident and think, wow, that was so much nicer than this. Uh, Giotto de Bondon, he contributed to painting people with some level of three-dimensional depth. That's not something that they really had developed before then. It was much more of a two-dimensional art, and this does not mean that everyone else starts copying this at the time. These were normal people, so these were not wealthy people. They were your average people instead. So as history started to push towards more of a social aspect, we're looking at the community and society as a whole instead of specific people. This kind of does the same thing back in the 1300s. So if you're looking for an impressive point to try and tie things together on your AP, and this is a good thing to talk about and compare the movement in history today, socialism, to the change in paint. They used a lot more vivid colors at this time, but this is before the Renaissance. If you look to the left, you can see the betrayal of Christ at the bottom. I'm sorry, at the top. I don't know why I get confused between the top and the bottom. I only have two pictures on the page. Well, anyway, it shows the kiss of Judas and Christ accepting his future. For those of you who are not familiar with the story of Christ and Judas, Judas helped the soldiers arrest Jesus, leading to his execution. He was paid 30 coins of silver, and then he hung himself like a Polaroid picture. Oh, wait, no. It's shaken like a Polaroid picture. Okay. Down at the bottom, you see the Lamentations, and those are all the people that are mourning the death of Christ, including some angels above. So, in case you're looking at this on your phone, those may look like birds at the top, but they're actually angels. And you can see that some of the people that are mourning over Christ are saints, and they're not wearing globes over their head. That's shining glory of God that's pouring out for them. Okay, so these are a lot of his important followers. In urban life, it was really rough during the bubonic plague because sometimes places like bathhouses closed. Now, not everyone got to go to the bathhouses. It's mainly a place for the wealthy, and we don't really have as many of those here in the United States today. But there are still parts of the United States where you can go to a bathhouse. Uh, One of those is in Hot Springs, Arkansas, and so they have really warm water or different minerals in the water that will help you with some of the different elements that you may have. My family, if you go back to the early 1800s, my great-great-great-grandfather, three great-great-great-grandfather, was the King of Baden. And Baden in German and English means bath. So they had a lot of really infamous bathhouses. Now I know you're thinking, wow, you're next in line to be the King of Baden. Well, not really. He had like 20 sons, the king did, and my great-great-grandfather was way down the line, ended up coming to the United States, and he was part of a poor farming family there. We didn't even get discounts to go to some of the bathing houses in Baden when we went to Germany, so it's kind of sad. Also, this starts the regulation of prostitution, so They didn't spread the bubonic plague. People started getting married later, and they started to clean up sanitation. You start to see some of the creation of, and by the way, this is not in large numbers, but some of the major cities, uh, modern sewer systems were start to put in where they would take all the tinkle and boo boo and create little rivers out of the city so they wouldn't be in the center of town. Medicine was still based on the Greek theories of Galen, and Galen basically was the model for how to study medicine of people, and he did it based on animals. And of course, in his scientific model, the item in the body that pumped all the blood was the liver, and he said that you have two different kinds of blood in the body. Also, how do you fix someone when they're sick? It's probably because they have too much blood, so they often would bleed people. And then they did herbal medicines, which weren't as bad of an idea as some of the other things that they did. Surgeons and midwives practiced medicine, but they didn't have this thing called hand washing. So a lot of women died in childbirth as a result of the doctor or midwife delivering a baby and then going on to another house without washing their hands, and caused the death of the other mother. In 1335, you have the first mechanized clock in Milan, Italy. Eyeglasses were also introduced pretty close to this time period, but just for the wealthy. They didn't have medical insurance at the time, and they also didn't have the site where I buy my glasses, which is zenny.com, who is not really sponsoring me for this, and there's no real benefit to you doing that for me, or I mean, I guess it is for them. But if you need a cheap pair of glasses and you have your prescription, uh, the kind that I'm wearing right now actually cost me about $16. I'd show them to you, but I'm just giving you audio right now. So, I don't know. I guess I did a commercial for them. Today's class was brought to you by Zenny and the letter E. Uh, Medieval Russia. To the left, you see Vladimir of Kiev, and he pushed during his time for Russia to have the religion of the Greeks. So Orthodoxy was introduced during his reign. They also had a lot of ties to the Byzantine Empire. Shortly thereafter, Genghis Khan and the Mongols ran their horde through Russia. He put his grandson, Batu Khan, as the king of Kiev, and he ruled Russia with the Golden Horde. When they took over, they would marry into all the nobility of the area. Genghis Khan had well over 100 sons, and it said something like 8% of everyone in Asia today is descended from Genghis Khan. That's like 3 billion people total in the continent, and so if you do the simple math, that's about 240 million people are descended from Genghis Khan. Any Russians who fought back against Batu Khan or Genghis Khan's armies were sold into slavery. And the Muslim influence of Genghis Khan's men would really isolate Russia from Western Europe. And it wasn't until Ivan III in 1480 that you see kind of a retaking of the land and push back towards Russian Orthodoxy. This ends yet another day of notes. I'd like to thank Christopher Frailer, who helped me frame a lot of the notes for this class. Jackson Spiegel, Spielvogel, who wrote our textbook. And to a certain extent, Roger Beck. I normally don't thank people in the bibliography, but I figure if you're still listening, I'd do it anyway. I'd also like to give a very special thanks to my wife, Amber Dawn Dugdale, for her rendition of the intro to Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. So, as for everyone else, we do have a test coming up on next class. So, it'll just be over this first unit or chapter 11 in your textbook. So, everyone have a great day, and I'll talk to you soon.